Alrighty, everyone. Thank you as always for tuning in. Today we have a great real planner, or not real person, but sorry, retirement planner chat. I'm joined by Liz Yoder. Liz, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Andy?
I am super, thank you. I had stayed up a little too late watching the Super Bowl and eating and drinking too much. So it is Monday morning for those who are wondering what I'm talking about. So it's less than 12 hours after the Super Bowl.
There were
And I'm
a
worn
lot of
out.
cars in the drop off this morning. Some kids didn't make the bus, I think, for the same
Yes.
reasons.
Yeah, they said during the Super Bowl, it's like this is one of the biggest days for people calling out. I think like 22 million people plan on calling out. I don't know where they get that stat from, but I believe it.
Yeah.
So Liz, you have your own firm, Dependent Financial Planning, based out of Maryland. Can you tell us a little more about
hmm
that?
Yeah. So I focus on planning for families with disability considerations. So I work with the retiring um, pair or individual and make sure that their plan incorporates the needs of their child or dependent who will have lifetime disabilities. I also work with other people who get diagnosed late in life and just want some um, sensitivity around what disability looks like for them, if they even consider it a disability. And so I focus primarily on folks who might be eligible for for government benefits at some point in time in their life.
Okay.
But most of the people with disabilities are dependent adults, people 18 and older who are eligible for Social Security and Medicaid at some point in time. And I work with them to understand the balance of income, asset planning, and everything like that.
And did you start out in this business directly into the special needs related planning, or were you more of sort of a broader planner and kind of landed in this? I don't want to say niche, but this area of specialization.
Yeah, this was my focus. This is
Okay.
why I got into planning. I actually meandered and took a long route to get here. But I studied speech therapy in college.
Okay.
I then moved in to a community group home where I was a caregiver for 3 years and lived the life of direct service provider. Um, Fell in love with advocacy and realized that my path wasn't going to be caregiving, but was going to be advocacy. And I did it through seeking out my certified financial planning designation. Um, so then I worked primarily with typical retirees for about 3 or 4 years, and then found my way to the education that I needed to do the work that I actually mean to do for the rest of my career, which
Great.
is specializing in these folks.
And it truly is a specialization. And like I think folks have heard me say, there's a few things I won't work with in my practice simply because I know it requires a lot more knowledge and expertise that I don't have, such as special needs planning and international, cross-border issues and people that
Mhm.
own businesses. I'm like, they're no less important than anything else. I just realized like, I can't do it justice. So I'm glad there's folks like you who do choose to specialize in things, like this. So you, excuse me, your business now based in Maryland. Can you give a little rundown, kind of what the business looks like, how you work, et cetera?
Yeah. So I live in Maryland, so it's based in Maryland, but I do work as a online service provider
Okay.
as far as financial planning goes. So most people I meet are from the East Coast, I would say, but I do have some West Coast clients. I am registered in Connecticut and Texas. Um, and I actually, when people want to meet me in person, I will rent out kind of a Regis Center to
Hmm.
to meet with people in private, typically more in Maryland and Connecticut when I do go up there,
Yep.
because that's just the primary base of my clients. But most people meet me online, and then I can fit into their schedule however they would like me to have our meetings together.
Okay. And are you able to work in other states beyond Maryland, Connecticut, and Texas? Or
Yeah, so I'm not registered in other states right now, but I only have a handful of folks who are in those states. So when I
okay,
get beyond what's called the de minimis amount, I plan to register in whatever state that I get there. So that's typically between 4 to 6 clients in a state outside of where I'm registered for folks who aren't aware
got it.
of
Okay.
what that might look like.
So you
Yeah,
can work in those other states, but once you get to a certain number of clients, then you have to formally register. Sort of
right.
formality, technicality. So
The state wants me to say, "Hey, I have a business here and I'm
right.
doing well."
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we get into the technical questions, what's one random fun fact or interesting bit about yourself you are willing and able to share with listeners here?
So I work from home and I get to listen to the sounds of my chickens in my backyard. I'm a hobbyist, a small chicken raiser.
Oh,
I
cool.
have
Okay.
5 chickens in my backyard and it's super fun.
Do they produce eggs? I'm just curious now because I know there's like an egg shortage with the bird flu and stuff. Are you open
I
up a
am
second
I
business now?
am So I'm receiving my first eggs of the season as of 2 weeks ago. They started laying again.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I'm excited to share because we don't eat very often eggs. My husband's trying to cut back on cholesterol producing
Hmm.
foods. So we'll pass them around the neighborhood. We don't sell them at this point in time.
Right.
It's That's a hassle for us to get registered. So we just, from the kindness of our hearts, we
Just
share with our
share some
neighbors.
eggs. Right. Okay. Good to know. Very cool. All right. So, what is one area of retirement planning, and maybe if you want to, mention special needs related specific things as well, but one area that consumers overlook or don't give enough consideration to, and on the flip side, what's an area you think they give too much consideration to?
So when it comes to understanding the dynamic of like a two retirement household where we're talking about parents and young people, I think that will need the money to last throughout their lifetimes. I think one thing that people um, overthink about is all my money needs to be all that they have in the future. So if you're thinking about someone who is working or close to retirement, um, most people with a child with a disability, even if they're in their 20s, 30s, they're often thinking about their retirement savings as the future of their child's security. And that's very true. There's a lot of flexibility that an inheritance can provide to a child. What an adult child. What they don't always look at is the benefit of the long-term disabled adult child Social Security benefit,
Mm,
which is significant for folks who have a disability prior to 22. They are eligible for their parents' benefit once they retire and after they die, or file for Social Security disability themselves. And that amount is substantial. It's a $20,000 to $30,000 a year salary for these folks who are dependent on
mhm,
government resources. So if we think about that as an annual income for these folks, and they may have a minimal curiosity of travel, they may have a smaller life than the retiree themselves, the need for them to supplement their income in the millions is not that much. We like to see $1 million in retirement be gifted to a person with a disability, but the risk there is that it's never going to be spent because the person it just doesn't have the lifestyle that affords that kind of inheritance. Um, so under living while the retiree is living is something that I continue to have a conversation about. I want people to enjoy their lives together, to spend it together while they can, um, and to not put as much importance on the inheritance as they would for other situations where they know that the inheritance might be helpful, but it's not everything. And the government benefits really do get people very far alone. So if there's no inheritance, people can be comfortable in the life that they are in when the supports are right. So that's one thing that I try and address people's fears when they have a dependent child, that there are supports in place, if there are supports in place for them, for healthcare, for housing, for care support and community support, then the inheritance isn't that big of a concern. Something that is so that's kind of an under thought about and over thought about in the same way.
Okay. Now, this just goes to show how little I know, but I guess does it depend on the child and the extent of their needs and the costs and support associated with it? Like, what if someone has extreme medical costs in needs for the rest of their life versus someone who is less of a physical issue and more of a, I don't know, social or mental, whatever the proper terminology is, where they need assistance in just day-to-day kind of activities and not being able to live on their own. Are there different levels of program and support and things, if people know how to get them, request them, get approved for them, et cetera, that do fund most of what their needs are, be it physical or social or whatever?
Yeah. So the medical stuff. So if there's high medical needs, that's all Medicaid. That's all
Okay.
Medicaid and Medicare. People who are on Social Security disability income, SSDI, which comes in when a parent retires or files for disability or passes away. For the dependent adult child, they become eligible for Medicare after 2 years. So there's Medicaid and Medicare, so they can get state care anywhere for anything, and it usually doesn't cost them anything because of their living within the low asset rules
Hmm.
of protecting their money in special needs trusts, able accounts, and other protected ways that allow them to have extra savings outside of what they live on,
Okay.
basically. Um, so health insurance and health care is always going to be there for people with high medical needs. So then it's just the daily care support that is the question of where's the funding for that. And most of the time, that's also coming from Medicaid. That's coming from Medicaid support programs. So Medicaid has a two-pronged system. There's health insurance for doctors' offices, and then there's the waiver programs. The state provides systems of support for people with disabilities, and that's the Medicaid system as well. So that includes caregiving, it includes job support, it includes other things that respite care for respite support for people who are still living at home, for the family to go out and spend time either on vacation or grocery shopping, whatever it may
Hmm.
be. So there's structures within each state that provide those types of services. Not every state is equal. Each state has their own Medicaid resources and their own Medicaid funding and how they choose to use it. Um, and so when I'm talking with a client, I'm always trying to figure out, where do you live? What are the resources available to you? And how do we fit you in with the right support and get you on the list so that when you need it, it's available to you. Because there is a wait time for a lot of these. But once you're on it, once you're receiving it, it's a huge support, and it's not a financial burden.
Okay.
It's the times when there's a list and you're on it for 10 years and you need that care anyway, that's where it's a financial need. So then families are trying to provide that care support, hiring professionals. They're trying to find uh, like travel expenses, taking Ubers to work or to doctor's appointments, things like that, that become the financial cash flow of a family to
Yeah.
provide those supports.
Now, if someone has a child who's in their 20s, 30s, how many people do you come across where they don't even know about all the resources available to them? Or
Oh,
is it
almost every time.
really? So
Well,
I
it's
almost want
just
to step
that,
back and be like, how do people even start to know this stuff? I mean, if you're, you have a new child, a newborn who has special needs, I guess then you realize you got to go through the process. But if your child's already 20 or 30, I guess it's a poor assumption to think that they are already aware of what resources are available, right? There's still lots of things people don't know, it sounds like.
yes. The reality is we deal with what we know and we deal with what's right in front of us today as much as we can. So, a family who has a child with a disability from birth will be trying to figure out caregiving and school. And they'll be tunnel visioned on those programs. They'll become professionals. They'll become like PhD level competent on advocacy. They'll understand everything with the school system, what's inclusion, what's not. They'll get them involved in programming. And then once the child graduates, either 18 or 22, because school goes on longer for kids who are eligible to continue, typically people with intellectual disabilities, once they graduate, they enter this whole new world of adult services. And the adult services are confusing. It's a whole nother department of services. There's options, but they don't know which one is right. The options are available to include to encourage um, job participation, and depending on the child or the adult at this point, they may be a better fit for um, seeking out their own independent um, occupational goals versus
Hmm.
just getting hired anywhere. So it's a whole balancing act of who is this person really, what supports do they need, and what supports are out there, and trying to find that balance. So I always will do personal research on what's around, where as far as what can be a network resource for folks. I'm not a social worker and I don't place people in programs, but I know certain things about what should be in an area, what nonprofit networks can be a good resource for families, and try to plug in as many partners and care and support as I possibly can so that they're not feeling like they're alone in trying to figure it out because
Hmm.
it's just too much information. So they
Yeah.
just it's often that they don't know what's out there because it's just overwhelming and they already did the PhD program in elementary school. They already did that.
Right.
So they're burned out and can't really often get the resources when they're eligible for them immediately because it's not present in their reality yet.
Huh. Now, and this is very off script, but I feel like this is what people want to know who are listening
Mhm.
today. As a child is approaching the age at which they age out of school, be it 18 or 22 or whatever it is, or the child's already well in their 30s, where can someone go, the parents go to say, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, where's a spot for them to check? Am I getting, or am I going to be getting, again, in the case of someone like aging out of school,
Mhm.
what's the next step? Let me make sure I'm not leaving something on the table. I'm doing everything I can. Like, is there a singular place someone can go to see what resources are available to me, to my child?
I mean, one would hope, but not quite. The Department of Disability Services, whatever it's called in the state. So there's the DDS, there's the DDA, there's every state will have its own
Okay.
acronym for the Department of Disability Services, Department of Aging and Disability, whatever it may be, is the place to apply for resources. Certainly being eligible and on Medicaid gets you into that world of developmental disability services. Attorneys are great resources. Attorneys that focus on special needs law, Medicaid law, will often know the local resources, some of the best places that because they have to partner with them as well. And so it's reaching out to like 3, 4, and then there's always Facebook or networks of other families to say, hey, my child's graduating.
Right.
What can you tell me about what's available? And to hear stories online about what pursuits others have gone through. Certainly, the goal of a high school program is always to prepare a student for what's after graduation. So the process of an individualized education plan or an IEP should always be looking at employment or what's next. And so if you're not as a family hearing about the opportunities of day support in high school, you have every right to ask for that in the programming at high school, and either with guest speakers or people actually bringing them to these placement centers as a day trip from high school. Ideally, they would get a sense of what's local, what are the opportunities for these kids beyond high school. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways we learn about opportunities. They're not all straightforward.
Yeah. Now, tying it back to the questions here, which seems like a decent segue. If someone is looking for a financial advisor for their own retirement and for, to factor in the needs of their child or children, where do they go? Where do they look? I mean, you obviously know what you're doing, but are there sources? Are there certain designations? Are there networks of special needs focused advisors for people?
Yeah. So if you're working with an attorney, certainly ask the attorney who drafts special needs trusts if they recommend any financial planners that they've been in practice with, if they've partnered or know the work is doing well. There are some professional networks that have dedicated their time and energy into advocating for special needs planning, and so that's the Alliance of Special Needs. I want to make sure I get it right. I'm going to type it up as I speak so I don't. The Alliance of the Special Needs Alliance, is that right? Sorry.
Okay. Whatever it is, we'll be sure to get it right, and I'll link to it in the notes here.
There's the Special Needs Alliance, which is primarily attorneys. And then there's the Academy of Special Needs Planners as attorneys and advisors. So you can search your state to see who's in your state, and ideally somewhere who's local to you. Typically, you want someone who has some understanding of Medicaid. And that's not a lot of advisors. Just, you want to make sure that folks are well versed in that at least. Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else that might be helpful for folks looking for a professional. Yeah. Some folks get into special needs planning as a need for their own family. Because they have a child with a disability. I personally, it was just advocacy for me. It was chosen family for me. So there are many of us who have some understanding of the system, the process, and the networks that can be created, and others who are looking at it from specifically the financial standpoint. So just get to know the person who you're talking to see what their perspective is and why they got involved and what other resources they can link you into.
Okay.
There is a designation, the Chartered Special Needs Consultant designation. If you already have a background and understand kind of the system, I should say, it's a tax. It's a tax focused designation, and it doesn't really teach folks exactly how to do the work. So I'd say if someone has that designation, it means that they're seeking out working with folks, but it's not necessarily needed if people already are within the world of disability planning, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Um, it's a signal that people want to work with you.
Right. Okay. Now, where do you go to learn more? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you research the agencies and support things that are and networks that are available, but anything in particular you found helpful as a practitioner of this to learn, not just the normal retirement planning stuff, but the special needs related aspects?
I spend a lot of time looking at Social Security's procedures manual.
Okay. Exciting. Yeah.
I do a lot of time. I spend a lot of time on Social Security's website. And other things. Yeah, it's just a lot of conversation with other practitioners to make sure that we're not missing anything because we tend to be a little siloed. So anytime I can, I'm participating in groups of other special needs planners of disability, to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page with how we're thinking about a family situation.
Okay. Are there any client types or disability types that aren't a fit for you? Well, I guess first question is, do you only work with people who have some sort of element of special needs planning, or do you have other clients who don't?
So I have clients who don't have that aren't eligible for Social Security and Medicaid, but might be in the future. And so there are people who come to me who are like, I have to set up a special needs trust because I want access to this retirement money that I have. And I tell them, well, special needs trust, and this is someone who's intellectually able, but has maybe a disability that will be more present later in life. Say, so when we put money in a special needs trust, you have no control of that. So is that actually what you want? And they're like, no, no. I want
Right.
I want an
Okay.
asset protection plan. I want to be able to use my money and not get penalized on a withdrawal. So then I talk them through that and we might work together for a short amount of time to say, hey, this is the structure that you want to do before you need to get onto these services. But before that, before you become eligible or need to become eligible for certain medical supports, the structuring a payment plan from a retirement account might be better than throwing it all in an account that you personally can't touch and you have to rely on a trustee. Um, there are people who never plan to get on to benefits, but have either autism or a other OCD or something that they just prefer to work with someone who's aware of their kind of communication style, possibly, or just aren't going to pressure them into being something they're not.
Right.
And a lot of professionals, whether we know it or not, we expect things of our clients. I have high expectations of my clients being honest and open with me, but not high expectations um, that pressures them to do anything they're not comfortable with, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah, that gives me a wide range of clients who maybe don't have a disability in the sense of Social Security, but have a disability diagnosis that they might not find disabling. That I tend to work with those folks. I don't take typical retirees as
Got it. Yeah.
clients
Okay.
or typical 25-year-old. I usually don't unless they have a family member connection.
That's good. And it's important, I think, to stay in your area of specialization, not just for the clients, but for yourself to really make sure your focus and the repetitions and,
Yeah.
the skill set you build is really kind of stays down the fairway, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Now, some of these questions are kind of generic, and I'm curious if there's differences in the answer for the planning that you do or that your clients need with like investment management, for example. Are the types of things that you would invest in any, I don't know, different or have other angles to them because of potential special needs, whether they be in a special needs trust or plan to get distributed through a, early tap of the retirement accounts to fund life?
So really not. We're always going to be looking at the distribution plan of the individual who the account is designed for. So in the case of a special needs trust, if that person is being currently supported by their family, the trust can be as aggressive as it needs to be. I don't get involved in anything that would be considered a risky investment. It's just going to be in typical, like, diversified U.S. international stuff. But especially because we have clients who are risk averse, who are saying, okay, this needs to be there for my child. So there's nothing that's going to be fancy or special as far as the investments go, but the timeline is going to be reviewed as, when do you need the money? How much do you need at any given time? And the special needs trust is certainly that, going to be looking at those same questions. I think, yeah, the parents' accounts are sometimes before a special needs trust is funded. Sometimes we are more aggressive than a typical retiree because we know, again, we're trying to fund that special
Right.
needs trust for someone who's 30 years younger. With
So you're
that,
investing for the child, not investing
yeah.
for the parent necessarily. Yeah.
So we just want to be as cognizant of the timeline of the funding, the need of the funding, and also the risk tolerance of the family.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do
So typical retirement planning,
Yeah.
just
Okay.
more going on with it.
I guess there's other people's timelines and cash flow needs now worked into the equation, but that doesn't
Yeah.
change the
So
particular investments themselves.
yeah. So like when I'm doing a plan for folks, I always look at the child's plan when I'm looking at the parent's plan. So I do two separate
Okay.
scenarios on Right Capital is the platform that I use. And I look at the younger adults' cash flows. I look at what is it that they need independently of their parents. What are they getting from Social Security? What's that timeline? And then I say, okay, what is the need of an inheritance? What is the need of gifting now to make sure that cash flow works? And then we build it into our recommendations for the retirees to say, hey, this is what we need to protect. This is what either life insurance or an inheritance needs to kind of provide to have the stability for the younger person. And then we determine what the investment strategy is from there.
Okay. Do using annuities, are they used uniquely in special needs scenarios? I'm just thinking out loud here. So like as a parent,
Yeah.
maybe if you want to ensure you leave a certain amount of money, maybe you do annuitize a decent chunk of your money and that's what you live on and you don't touch like the remaining liquid stuff, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just making this up here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things that folks will do. Certainly, I even think of a pension retirement plan as an annuity. If that has the option to go to the child after the retiree has passed, that's an annuity payment that could be coming to the child. Now, that requires a first party trust to be set up to receive that income, so that it's protected for Social Security and for Medicaid purposes,
Okay.
mostly Medicaid purposes. so there's extra planning there of how is this money being received. There are, I mean, I primarily use annuities as a short-term scenario instead of the long-term scenario as cash protection as opposed to, as opposed to like a long-term strategy. It's more often that life insurance is what we're choosing to do, and that we would propose a large life insurance policy paying those premiums and using annuities possibly to provide that payment to the life insurance. So there's
Okay.
some pairing of annuities, and so that we could guarantee that that's going to be paid regardless of the family's ability to pay in the future.
Got it.
And that helps folks feel comfortable about their future spending, about their future healthcare needs. And if they end up on Medicaid personally, that premium's still going to be paid through that annuity. So that's something that we've been working on with the partner that I have for life insurance.
That makes sense. So whether it's like a 20 years of payments you choose for the policy or for the rest of your life or whatever, to ensure there's always enough money to pay those insurance premiums, you buy an annuity where the guaranteed income syncs up with the premiums needed for the policy. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Good. That makes sense. Now, trust. Normally I ask this question in the context of normal, just living, plain vanilla, revocable
I
trust.
use trusts.
Yes. So now, special needs trust. I mean, a lot of people have heard of that term and throw it around. I think they may not actually know what it does or, why they may want or need it. Can you just, I know you're not a lawyer, but can you just sort of open platform to talk about trusts as you think people should know about in special needs planning?
Yeah. So special needs trust is a Medicaid protected asset vehicle holder that can be either set up by someone other than the individual for money that can be received by the individual in the future, or it can be set up by the individual themselves with support of the court system to receive outright inheritance and insurance claims that are paid out directly to the individual, or things like pensions. Whether or not it's a first party, which is the individual's own money being saved for their own use with the direction of a trustee, or a third party trust, the rules are the same in that those assets are not countable by Medicaid because it's set aside for a sole beneficiary with a disability who is not given authority to use that money. The trustee has sole and complete discretion of how the funds get spent within the context of Medicaid rules. And that's the part that's tricky because not all of us are Medicaid law readers.
Right.
And so we often try to use partners and attorneys and in trust companies to direct how those funds should be used. An example of that is a client had property that their nephew lives on, and they wanted him to have more independence, so they're structuring a place for him to live on the property. Well, the nephew doesn't own the property, the individual does. So you can't use money for contributing to the property value of the owner. What you can do is create an agreement with an attorney that says, if this property gets sold, this part of the property, this structure that's new on the property, is owned by the special needs trust. So if that ever it gets sold or changes hands, that needs to be compensated for. That's not something that's like comes easily to a lot of us to think this isn't for his benefit, this is for the family's
Right.
benefit. This can't come from the special needs trust unless it's an agreement that's made that says it can come from the special needs trust, but it has to come back to the special needs trust in the future. And that then is a Medicaid approved expense of building that structure on the property. So when we're working with special needs trust, we are very much in the weeds of trying to make sure we're doing the right thing by the Medicaid law of each and every individual state that we're working in.
And how often do these laws change? Are they pretty static? And once you know the nuance, like
yeah, they're pretty static. It's not easy to get the nuance though. So there is a lot of fear around spending out of a special needs trust because we're jumping through hoops to be like, what's an eligible expense? It's not housing unless it's XYZ. It's not, it's anything above that doesn't replace or supplant, is the legal terminology, of the benefits of Social Security and Medicaid. And any other benefit that the individual might be eligible for at the time of the use of the distribution.
So what happens if it's not a valid or qualified distribution and violates the state's Medicaid rules? Does it nullify the whole trust, or does it just knock them out of like eligibility for Medicaid? Or
so that's particular. I'm not comfortable answering that question.
Fair enough. Great answer. Okay.
There are ways to nullify the language of a trust, a third party trust, if the individual's money is added to a third party trust, that negates the estate planning protections of third party trust. So it becomes a first party trust. So we never want Social Security or income or a future inheritance to be added to the third party trust. If it comes directly to the individual, it needs to go, it needs to go in the first party trust if we're trying to make that a contribution that's too large to put somewhere else.
Okay. How about now, like long-term care insurance or care of the parents as they age? I suspect in a lot of people's cases who have adult children, I mean, I don't think most people want their adult children to bear the burden of having to provide long-term care and house, ailing parents, although a lot of people do. Is the analysis of, retiring parents or retired parents with a special needs adult child, is there more emphasis on, let me make sure we have some sort of long-term care plan really well ironed out because, the child, it's not an option for the child to eventually care for the parents, take the parents in?
Yes and no, because it's more important often to them that their child is protected. I mean, it's important. It's more important to them. First priority is their child has what they need. Okay. Parents are great like that. Right. They sacrifice themselves. So if we can determine that they have what they need in an inheritance and that there's assets available to move towards a long-term care plan, then yes, we will make sure that we're protecting that inheritance through long-term care. It's more complicated in the values question of what's the most significant thing we need to do as a family. So sometimes they're not as convinced that long-term care policies are important. They're more willing to put things into a permanent life insurance policy than they are to do long-term care. And sometimes there's long-term care provisions now in those policies that we can access. So that's part of the permanent life insurance conversation.
Got it. So you would work into like a hybrid policy, the long-term care protection,
sometimes,
as opposed to standalone, typically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes. Yeah.
That makes sense. Tax. I'm big into tax planning. Are there any particular areas of opportunity or different things that you think about as an advisor focused on working with clients with disabilities or children with disabilities from a
Yeah.
tax perspective?
So one of the main things that folks don't think about, if they are itemizing, and they are paying for medical expenses for their child, um, that's certainly something that can be added to their medical equation.
Okay.
Things like service animals, they're not a pet, they're medical equipment that can go into that medical equation. Also, home improvements that are required to provide accessibility to the home for the person with a disability, ramps, lifts, um, railings in the bathroom, whatever it may be, that is approved by a doctor, is also a property expense that can be added to the medical part, the
Okay.
deductibility of the home, or
The improvement. Yeah.
the current annual return. So things like that are big ones that just you don't think about when it comes to standard
Yeah.
planning.
Okay.
It's the property improvement and the medical devices that should be included. Um, Service animals are a big one that aren't covered by Medicaid.
Hmm.
So, especially in a year of acquiring a service animal, it could be $20,000 to have that animal trained, and to provide that education for that animal to be the right support for an individual. Um, and then there's all the met visits, all the regular health care for the animal is a medical expense for the individual with a disability. So those are
Oh,
the
really?
things that
Okay.
I think about when it's kind of like, well, this is odd. And I want people to know about this, especially people who are either independent, who don't have a whole lot of taxes, but
Yep.
maybe can itemize because they just got to do service animal that year. Um, and, um, and just applying all the medical stuff to that.
That's interesting. So I didn't know that. So with a service animal, the cost of purchase, cost of training, and then all of the maintenance sounds terrible to say, but vet visits
Annual.
and normal stuff,
Yeah.
that's all deductible medical expense. They don't make you prorate
Hmm.
between like a fraction is personal use and the rest is medical
Yeah.
or
If you think about the animal as a piece of medical equipment to the individual, all the maintenance
right.
of the animal, the
Okay.
food, even, that's theoretically, if you were able to be itemizing, it's worth tracking those expenses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. You mentioned up front one of the things was people almost thinking that they need to save and pass down more than is likely actually needed in many cases. So I guess that
Hmm.
ties into sort of a reluctance to spend, which
Hmm.
every human has anyway
Yes.
as they're in retirement, and then throw into the equation the needing to fund the life of your child after you're gone. How do you help people emotionally with that? Or are there, I assume there might be, but like support networks or other places people can go to help work on the emotional qualitative aspects of the money in your nest egg and, spending while still making sure you save enough?
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest question, isn't it? Like, how do we make people comfortable with what they have and live their lives? A lot of the time, it's just um, focusing on people's goals, trying to understand them as much as possible. To say, hey, you mentioned this offhandedly.
Right, right.
What does
You
that
picked up
actually
on it.
look
Yeah.
like? It's trying to hear those little like throwaway comments of, oh, well, we can't do that. Why not? Um, are you afraid of leaving your child alone for a significant period of time to take a vacation? If you are, then dying is going to be really challenging. So let's figure out, it's, for me, it's if you're afraid to leave your 40-year-old child at home alone, we need structures of support for you as a whole family to make sure that happens before you get sick. And ideally, while you can still take that trip. And it's encouraging those networks of support as soon as physically possible so that the responsibility can be shifted between the parents and other support networks so that they can have more freedom to have a retirement and not just a caregiving responsibility every day. So it's not, it's a lot of encouragement and a lot of going back to, if we were different people, we would be doing this comments. Or if we had more time, we would see this other part of the country. I'm like, well, how can we negotiate more time in your life so that we can get that done for you while you still can? Yeah, that's
Okay.
the only thing I can really think of.
Now, how do you go about trying to see, does someone have enough? So absent special needs planning, the basic process we all do is try to plot out the person's expected expenses the rest of their lifetime as best as we can reasonably guess. We know how much they have now. We know their sources of income. There's a few different statistical analysis tools, rules of thumb, whatever, to try to figure out, do you have enough? How do you start when there's a 30 or 40-year-old child, special needs child, to also fold in what do we anticipate that person, the child's expenses are going to be, which requires a knowing of what sources of income are they going to get from, Social Security disability up until their Social Security age or whatever. Is that standardized process, or is it all specific on, you have to look at the particular child and their needs and what income they are getting or support they're getting, and do that math and fold that into the equation as well?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, it's a mix of both because it is a unique financial plan.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own income sources. We assume that Medicaid and Social Security exist into the future. That's a big assumption that we make.
Right.
that it's a current that it kind of lives within the rules that it currently lives in, which includes for a 18-year-old SSI can start. For then we look at the ages of individuals when they plan to retire. We build in SSDI at one stage here and another stage once the parents have died, because SSDI changes based on whether a parent is living or has passed.
And just what's the difference, SSI versus SSDI, for folks listening who
Yeah,
this might be
so
of relevance to them, but they don't know it yet?
SSI is the poverty prevention program of Social Security that enables people with low assets and income once 18, independently of their families, to receive an income of up to $967 a month for their living needs. That's the kind of short and sweet of SSI. It is asset and income protected. If the person has more than $2,000, they're not eligible to receive SSI. If they receive more than $1,670 a month in income, in earned income, they're not eligible to receive SSI or SSDI. SSDI is the program of government paid insurance that when we work, we pay into and we earn our benefit. SSDI can be earned by the young adult by working up to a year and a half if they're under 26. And they earn enough Social Security credits, they can earn their own SSDI. But they can also receive the benefit of their parents working. So it's the equation of the work history of the parents. So it's always individualized. It's not that easy. 967 a month. It's going to be directly related to what that earned income history is. And during lifetime, they're eligible for 50% of their parents' full retirement age benefit, regardless of when the parent files. And after death of the parent, the benefit increases to 75% of that benefit. That would have been the full retirement benefit.
Got it.
Yeah. So it can be quite significant. And really compares pretty well to like a spouse's benefit while the parent is still living.
And so I guess part of good planning around that is making sure you really optimize. Sounds like a cheesy technical word to use, but like maximize or optimize the Social Security benefits, whether it's SSI, SSDI.
Yeah. So
benefit.
Early on in my process with a lot of folks is looking at that benefit timeline of this is when SSI starts. This is when SSDI could start, but it might not yet. This is when we suggest a parent retire or file for Social Security, not retire, but file for Social Security. And this is when we expect the parent's life to end. And that's where that benefit calculator comes in. Now, we also want to look at the same time is Medicaid and Medicare. So Medicaid starts like toe in with SSI, and Medicare starts 2 years after someone receives SSDI. So we're looking at if we can make those health expenses turn on Medicare sooner, we're going to be looking at, is that going to be because the child earns or because a parent filed for Social Security earlier than their full retirement age, or kind of there's all kinds of play in that medical and support benefit world that we want to make sure that we're including in the analysis. So it's individualized, same process, but many more layers to think about. Healthcare is one of the biggest things that we're planning for.
Right. I guess that's always going to be front and center.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this question's a new one I added this year, and you were only the second person to get it so far. But what do you feel are your biases in how you approach planning, products, strategy, etc.?
So from my background, I am always going to be encouraging as much independence of a young person as possible from their parents. And many people are not used to that pushback of like, you need to get your kid out of the house. And using the resources of the community and getting to know themselves outside of you. I spent 3 years living in a home where I saw people growing beyond what their parents expected of them because they weren't living at home. They weren't being cared for and provided for everything that they needed done. They were given space to push back and to grow into someone different than their parents knew. And to see that while the parent is still living is pretty magical. Like it's pretty amazing. So when I get families who are trying their best to keep their child living at home for as long as possible, I'm like, let's talk about something different. Let's, you're going to go on vacation next year. You're going to find how amazing it is to have your free time again and try and find ways to do that more often, because when you are away being yourself, they can also grow into themselves as well. And it takes years. So I try to do this as soon as possible. So that's a bias that I have when it comes to planning, is trying to encourage folks to get a move on those kinds of goals as soon as possible. And I know that it's something that I come with as a professional that might sometimes rub my clients the wrong way.
Right. I can imagine some cases. Right.
So oftentimes people are looking for, what do I do to get my kid out of the house? I'm like, let's talk about that. I'm excited for you.
Has anyone pushed back and said like no, like for whatever the
Well,
reasons are,
yeah,
they
yeah,
insist
people aren't
on?
ready all the time, and that's
Okay.
fine. It's a decades long process for many, many people. Um, and if you don't find the right support network, where the place that I lived was wonderful. Like I loved living there. It was work. It was hard,
So you
but it
actually lived
was
in the facility,
I
or you
lived
commuted?
there.
You did.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was my home and it felt like a home. There are places that do not feel that way and that feel like four people trapped living together who don't like each other.
Mm,
And and so it becomes this need for the family to be like, this is not where I want my child to be. So then we try and find a place where they do want to be. Sometimes it's an apartment that a caregiver comes in and works with them independently. Sometimes it is a group home where things aren't perfect, but they're not isolated alone in an apartment by themselves. It depends on who the person is, what their joys are, what they
mm,
need out of social life, and what they can tolerate. And sometimes it's their ability to be around other people because some people are not going to be safe for themselves or others living in a home together. And then we need to talk about other specialized institutions,
mm.
for lack of a better word, sometimes for those folks until they can get either medication or therapy
Right.
that can get them more stable in their own bodies.
Okay. And
It's a lot.
finally, yeah, yeah, definitely a lot to consider there. And it does. I can see how it's like you said, decades long work
Mhm.
and effort to do this. But it sounds like when it does all come together, magical sounds like
It's
the best way to describe
amazing.
it. So
Yeah. And when I saw some older parents receive pushback from their daughter who was elderly herself, and she yelled at her mom and said, "Take me home." And her mom's like, "Oh,
hmm.
you're not home right now, and your other home is your home." She's like, "Yes, take me home. I don't want to be here anymore." And like the really realization that she had made the shift to be able to call the place we live together home instead of her parents' house, um, allowed her to kind of let go some of the needs of
Right.
her as a parent, to bring her home every weekend and to make sure she ate here and there and there. Like, well, we can do that at home too. We can do
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
it. Yeah. So
Very
it's
cool.
it's really painful and joyful, the mix of both. But when folks are able to have more space for themselves, it's pretty amazing. Especially these families who've been these advocates for their child, strong, passionate people who've built workplaces for their children. Um, it's amazing to see, oh, I don't have to do that. That's not my job anymore. I can
Right.
just be mom. I can just be myself. I
Right.
can just be a husband. I can just be like a friend. I don't have to be on all the time as constant advocate because I know that where they are, they're being advocated for by
That doesn't need
people
to
who
consume your
love
identity
them.
as much. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's yeah, that's my perspective.
Okay. And for folks listening who are in or nearing retirement and have a child with disabilities or special needs, what's sort of the one thing you want them to know or think they should know from hearing you and seeing you?
Everything takes time. Um, and learning about the intricacies of planning, it's not going to feel, you're not going to get it right away. It takes, I talk about Social Security and Medicaid often in conversations with my clients or with nonprofits, various other community gatherings, I often say it takes about 14 times to hear this to actually understand what your reality is in relation to all these rules. So just give yourself permission to take time. It's challenging to figure out how you can get support, that you have permission to ask for support, and that you don't have to do it all on your own. There are lots of people out there trying to make life easier for you. And as a financial advisor, certainly that's one dimension that I can support families with. But it's all the other stuff of making sure that you have a network of support around you that has your goals for your child at heart. That's important to take time to develop.
Great. Great advice. And where can people go to find out more about you, your business, anything you want to share, content sources, whatever?
So I'm Liz Yoder. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do a lot on LinkedIn as Elizabeth Wallaben Yoder. And that's my full name. I add in my maiden name because there are many Elizabeth Yoders, but just one Elizabeth Wallaben. So there I am on LinkedIn. I also I try to blog a lot. Sometimes I'll write something for other publications. I am a CFP ambassador, so I might show up on a post on the CFP board's consumer-facing website as a poster there as well on disability ideas. My website is www.dependentfinancialplanning.com.
And I'll be sure to link all this stuff in the notes for those who are interested in taking a look and finding out more.
Cool.
Well, great, Liz. Thank you very much. This was highly informative for myself. I know lots of listeners will get a lot out of it, but I know I did as well. So thank you for sharing your time and knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all. Take care.